You've been told your whole life that you're too much, too loud when you laughed, too sensitive when you cried, too needy when you asked for love. What no one explained is that this wasn't truth, it was training, a hidden lesson that taught you to carve away pieces of yourself just to belong. And the cost of that silence is the emptiness you've been carrying ever since. You learned early that your presence carried weight. Maybe it was the way adults sighed when you asked another question. Maybe it was the silence in the room after you expressed joy too loudly. Or maybe it was the sharp words that told you directly, "Calm down, don't be so dramatic, stop crying." As a child, you had no way to separate your essence from their reactions. Every time you were told you were too much, what you heard instead was, "You are not acceptable as you are." And so, piece by piece, you began to fold yourself smaller. The damage of this lesson is subtle but devastating. It doesn't shout in your daily life, it whispers. It whispers in the way you hesitate before speaking, double-checking if your words will burden someone. It whispers in how you shrink your joy because you're afraid it might look foolish. It whispers in the way you apologize for simply existing, even when no one asked for an apology. These small hesitations pile up until they become the architecture of your identity. You don't notice it happening because it feels natural, but inside, a silent erosion is taking place. Think about your relationships. How often have you held back from expressing excitement because you didn't want to be too much? How often have you swallowed your tears because you thought they would push someone away? Even in love, you may find yourself offering only fragments of your heart, just enough to feel connection, but never enough to feel exposed. This is not because you don't want intimacy, but because your nervous system still remembers the punishment of being seen in full. It believes that safety depends on staying less than you truly are. Work is no different. Perhaps you are the one who always gives extra, who always over-delivers but never points it out. You hide your achievements because pride feels dangerous. You silence your creative spark because standing out feels like a risk. And while others may praise your humility, only you know the exhaustion beneath it, the constant trimming of yourself so you don't take up too much space. What once began as survival has now become your way of life. And the irony, the people who love you often sense the gap. They wonder why you hold back. They tell you they want to see the real you, but the real you feels buried under decades of careful shrinking. The invitation is there, but the fear is louder. And so you stay in the half-light, present, but never fully revealed. It feels safer this way, yet it leaves you starved for the very acceptance you crave. The tragedy of this lesson is not only that it silences you, but that it convinces you the silence is you. You begin to believe that you are naturally quiet, naturally restrained, naturally low maintenance. But if you listen closely, beneath that persona is still the child who wanted to laugh loudly, who wanted to sing off-key, who wanted to love without apology. That child never disappeared. They are simply waiting for permission. And this is where the story turns. Because what was once a cage can also become a doorway. The belief that you are too much has kept you hidden, yes, but it has also preserved the parts of you that were never meant to die. And the moment you are ready to look at this wound, the moment you are willing to face it, you will discover something life-changing. You were never too much. You were always exactly enough. But before we reach that truth, we need to travel deeper, back to where this belief was first born. Imagine yourself as a child, standing in a room where every sound you make feels louder than it should. You laugh and someone winces. You cry and someone says you're being dramatic. You ask for help and someone tells you to stop being needy. These moments seem small, but to a child they are earthquakes. Your nervous system learns faster than words. If I show my full self, I will lose love. If I take up too much space, I will be pushed away. And so the vow is made, not in language, but in silence. I will not be too much. I will shrink myself to survive. These vows are invisible contracts, signed without your awareness, yet binding for decades. You didn't decide logically to be quieter, to tone down your emotions, to keep your desires hidden. Your body decided for you. Each time joy was shamed, you learned to mute it. Each time grief was dismissed, you buried it deeper. Each time curiosity was ignored, you locked it away. Childhood is supposed to be a place of expansion, of testing edges, of discovering who you are. But instead, you learned contraction. Instead of freedom, you learned restraint. The playground of your spirit became a narrow corridor where only the smallest parts of you were allowed to walk. Sometimes this lesson wasn't taught with harsh words, but with absence. No one said, "Don't be too much." They just didn't notice you when you were. You brought home your artwork, and it was set aside without comment. You tried to tell your story, and no one really listened. You beamed with excitement, and no one mirrored it back. The silence taught you what words never had to. Your brightness was not welcome, and so you dimmed, not because you wanted to, but because being dim felt safer than being unseen altogether. In other cases, the lesson came wrapped in conditions. Perhaps love was offered when you were obedient, when you achieved, when you behaved, but withdrawn when you were messy, loud, emotional. You learned that love was fragile, something you could lose by being yourself. And children who fear losing love don't rebel, they adapt. They shape-shift into whatever version of themselves guarantees survival. You became the quiet one, the helper, the achiever, the easy child. Not because it was your nature, but because it was your armor. What's important to understand is that this vow, this "don't be too much" commandment, was not weakness, it was brilliance. A child has only one mission: to stay connected enough to survive. If shrinking yourself kept you safe, then shrinking was the most intelligent thing you could have done. You weren't broken for making that choice, you were resourceful. You turned yourself into what you needed to be in order to stay loved, or at least to stay near love, even if it was conditional. But survival strategies don't have expiration dates. They live on long after the danger has passed. And that is why, as an adult, you may still feel the echo. You may still mute your laughter, still bite back your tears, still swallow your truth. Because somewhere deep inside, the child within you believes it is still unsafe to take up space. And until that child knows otherwise, until their vow is seen and released, you will keep living as though the old rules still apply. And here's the crucial part. Those old rules are not reality. They are echoes, written long ago in rooms you no longer live in, with people who no longer hold power over you. Yet until you see them for what they are, you live as though the present is still the past. That is why the work of healing is not about creating something new. It is about remembering what was hidden. And to remember, we must look not just at the vow itself, but at the impact it still carries into every part of your adult life. That is where we turn next. Look at your relationships now, and you'll see the fingerprints of that vow everywhere. You hesitate to say what you really feel, worried it will scare someone away. You catch yourself apologizing for things that don't require an apology. You laugh softly instead of fully, hold back tears until you're alone, censor your words so they won't sound too strong. And when someone asks how you are, you answer with what feels safe, not with what is true. On the outside, it looks like kindness, patience, self-control. On the inside, it feels like disappearing. In love, this wound often shows itself in the partners you attract. You may find yourself drawn to people who take up all the space in the room, leaving little for you. Their needs dominate, their moods decide the weather. Their silence becomes a storm you spend your energy trying to calm. And you oblige, not because you don't see it, but because deep inside, you fear that if you take up space, there won't be room for love. So you settle for crumbs, mistaking survival for connection. You tell yourself, better small and loved than big and alone. Yet even while you shrink, the ache grows louder, reminding you that this bargain was never meant to last forever. At work, the pattern is just as insidious. You say yes to projects when you're already overwhelmed. You overdeliver, staying late, double-checking, perfecting every detail, not out of ambition, but out of fear. Fear that if you ever let them see your limits, your fatigue, your humanity, you'll be deemed unworthy. And when recognition doesn't come, you don't get angry. You blame yourself. Maybe I didn't do enough. Maybe I was too much trouble asking for help. The cycle repeats, leaving you exhausted, praised for your reliability but unseen for your truth. Even in friendships, the vow whispers. You listen more than you speak. You comfort but rarely confess. You become the safe one, the dependable one. the one others lean on. But when you need to lean, you hesitate. You don't want to burden, to be too heavy too much. And so you carry your grief alone, your dreams alone, your disappointments in silence. The bond feels stable, but secretly it's lopsided because you've decided your wholeness is too much to risk revealing. The impact doesn't stop with people. It seeps into your relationship with yourself. When you look in the mirror, you critique before you admire. When you think of your goals, you minimize before you dream. You tell yourself to be realistic, to stay small, to expect less, not because that's what you truly want, but because your body remembers the punishment of being too bold. Even joy feels suspicious. The moment you laugh too loud, dance too freely, or love too openly, there's a pang inside. Careful. Someone will notice. Someone will say it's too much. And just like that, the joy fades, swallowed by caution. This is what makes the wound so devastating. It convinces you that survival is virtue, that shrinking is kindness, that silence is strength. And because the world often rewards these traits, the cycle is harder to see. You get praised for being humble, for being easy, for never demanding. But no one sees the cost. No one sees the child inside, pressing their back against the wall, trying to make themselves invisible. And over time, invisibility feels safer than intimacy, even though intimacy is the very thing you long for most. The tragedy is not just what you lose in relationships or work or friendships. It is what you lose in yourself. The music that doesn't get written, the laughter that never echoes, the love that never gets to breathe. You lose the fullness of your own life, not because it was stolen from you, but because you were taught it was dangerous to claim it. And yet, even here, even now, something inside you refuses to be silenced completely. That small voice, the one that whispers late at night, "I want more than this," is proof that the vow is not absolute. It can be seen, it can be named, and once named, it can be released. And so the question becomes, how do we untangle this vow without shaming the child who once needed it? How do we step into wholeness without betraying the younger self who chose smallness to survive? The answer lies in understanding the strange paradox of healing, that what feels like sabotage was once protection. That is where we turn next. The vow of "don't be too much" is cruel because it hides itself as virtue. On the surface, it looks like humility, restraint, self-control. People may even admire you for it. The one who never demands too much, who never steals the spotlight, who carries burdens quietly. But beneath the praise, the truth is darker. That vow was not born from wisdom, it was born from fear. Fear that your aliveness, your truth, your joy would be too heavy for those who were supposed to love you. And yet, here is the paradox. The vow saved you. It gave you a way to survive in a world that felt unsafe. When the people around you couldn't handle the fullness of your being, your nervous system found a way to keep you alive, by cutting off pieces of yourself. That's not weakness, that's brilliance. A child who learns to become smaller is not broken, they are resourceful. They sense what will protect them, and they do it, even if it costs them wholeness. Survival always comes first. The problem is not that the vow existed. The problem is that it never expired. What once kept you safe is now what keeps you bound. The storm has long passed, but you're still standing under an umbrella. The danger is gone, but the locks on the door remain. And every time you silence yourself, every time you hold back, you are not responding to the present moment. You are responding to ghosts. Ghosts of parents who criticized, teachers who mocked, friends who withdrew, lovers who said, "You're too much." Their voices live inside you, and the vow keeps them alive. Here is where the paradox deepens. The very thing you thought was shameful, your too muchness, is exactly where your power lives. Your laughter, your passion, your anger, your tears, your dreams, all of it is the raw material of your wholeness. And when you push it down, life flattens, the colors fade, choices feel limited. You end up not living your life, but rehearsing survival in a world where no one is attacking you anymore. You carry an old war into a present that no longer needs defending. Think about this. The people you admire most, the ones who seem alive, magnetic, unshakably themselves, they are not less much, they are fully themselves. Their voice takes up space, their presence fills the room, their energy demands to be felt, and you don't call them too much, you call them radiant, powerful, unforgettable. Why? Because when wholeness shines in others, it feels like freedom. The very thing you punish in yourself is the thing you celebrate in everyone else. And this is why the vow is both a shield and a chain. It kept you alive, but now it keeps you from living. It kept love within reach, but only by making you believe you had to trade away parts of yourself for it. It kept connection possible, but only in half-truths, half-voices, half-dreams. And the moment you see this, the moment you understand that the vow is no longer serving you, something inside begins to stir. That stirring is the beginning of freedom. The paradox leads us here. To heal, you don't destroy the vow, you honor it. You say to your younger self, I see why you made that promise. I understand why you thought it was safer to stay small. You were right then, but now I am safe enough to choose differently. And in that moment, the vow begins to loosen, not because you ripped it apart, but because you gave it the one thing it never had: compassion. When you begin to see the vow for what it is, a relic of survival, not a reflection of your worth, something powerful shifts. You realize you don't need to keep punishing yourself for being alive. You don't need to apologize for existing in full color. What once looked like a flaw begins to feel like a clue. Your too muchness is not the enemy, it is the doorway. The very parts you silenced are the ones that can lead you back to joy, creativity, intimacy, and truth. Reframing begins not with force but with presence. Instead of pushing yourself to speak louder or take more space, start by listening to the parts you buried. Notice the urge to laugh and let it rise. Notice the words you almost swallow and let them out even shakily. Notice when you feel excitement but want to hold it back, and allow yourself to feel it without apology. Healing is not about suddenly becoming bold or fearless. It's about slowly letting your nervous system remember that safety and self-expression can exist together. And here's the secret most people miss. The vow doesn't dissolve when you fight it. It dissolves when you bring it into the light with compassion. If you tell yourself, I have to stop being small, you repeat the same violence that created the vow in the first place. But if you say, I see you, smallness. I know you kept me alive once. Thank you. You can rest now. The vow begins to fade, because what it always wanted was safety, and you, today, have the power to create it for yourself. This is also why healing isn't just about self-expression. It's about rewriting the deeper codes of attachment. When you stop silencing yourself, relationships change. You stop attracting the people who only love you in pieces. You stop chasing the ones who prefer your silence. And you begin to call in the ones who thrive in your fullness, who don't fear your emotions, who don't flinch at your voice, because you've stopped fearing it too. And if you've ever wondered why this pattern feels so tied to anxiety in love, the panic when someone pulls away, the fear of being abandoned, that's because the vow of don't be too much is the twin of another wound, anxious attachment. One silences your voice, the other makes you cling to connection, even when it hurts. They are both born from the same place, the child who learned that love was fragile. This is why I created the real reason you have anxious attachment, inner child healing. You'll find the link in the description below. In that teaching, I reveal how anxious attachment is not a flaw, but a vow, a survival bond your child self created when love felt inconsistent. If this video helps you see why you've been shrinking, the next will show you why you've been clinging, and together, they form the map back to safety. So as you listen now, let this truth settle in. You were never too much. You were simply never given enough space for your fullness to breathe. And the moment you reclaim that space, the cycle begins to end. The moment you begin to peel back the vow of, don't be too much, you discover something astonishing. Your aliveness was never gone. It was waiting, pressed beneath the weight of silence, biding its time until you were strong enough to let it rise again. What once felt like shame begins to feel like energy, the kind that moves your body to dance, your voice to speak, your eyes to shine without hiding. This isn't about becoming louder than everyone else. It's about no longer being quieter than yourself. When you taste even a fragment of that freedom, your nervous system begins to rewire. A laugh that once felt unsafe becomes medicine. A truth you once buried lands softly in the room, and you realize no catastrophe follows. A moment of excitement that once embarrassed you now lights up the space around you. These are not small wins. They are signals that the vow is losing its grip and your child's self is being welcomed home. And here is the paradox. What you feared would push people away often becomes the very thing that draws them closer. Your vulnerability, your intensity, your depth, they are not flaws but invitations. The right people will not flinch from your fire. They will warm themselves by it. And the ones who cannot stay in the presence of your fullness were never meant to walk beside you anyway. This is why breaking the vow is not just personal healing, it is collective. Each time you choose to show up whole, you give silent permission for others to do the same. Each time you speak instead of swallow, laugh instead of shrink, cry instead of harden, you remind the world, there is nothing shameful about being alive in your fullness. If these words stirred something in you, let it ripple further. Stay close. Subscribe, not just for another video, but for the ongoing journey of remembering yourself piece by piece. This space exists so you don't have to walk alone in silence anymore. Every step we take together weakens the old vow and strengthens the new truth. You were never too much, you were exactly enough. And as you hold that truth now, carry it with you into tomorrow. Because tomorrow, when the old voice whispers again, you will have this memory, that you once felt the freedom of being seen without shrinking, and once you've tasted it, you will never stop hungering for more. There is a silence that comes after the storm, not the heavy silence of suppression, but the quiet breath of truth finally spoken. That is where you now stand. For so long, the lesson of don't be too much wrapped itself around your chest, convincing you that safety lived in smallness. But tonight, something loosened. Tonight, you remembered that the storm never lived inside you. It lived in the voices that tried to dim your fire. When you see yourself without that veil, the world shifts. Rooms feel wider because you are no longer shrinking to fit inside them. Conversations feel truer because you are no longer weighing every word against rejection. Even your reflection changes, not in the shape of your face, but in the way your eyes look back at you with a steadiness that says, I will not abandon myself again. Wholeness was never a goal waiting far away. It was always the marrow in your bones, the current in your breath, the pulse beneath your skin. What you called healing was not repair, it was remembering the child who once laughed too loudly, cried too freely, dreamed too boldly, remembering that every piece of you that felt like too much was simply life itself trying to spill through you. And as this chapter closes, carry with you the knowing that you are not broken, not fragile, not unworthy of love. You are vast, you are layered, you are tender and fierce, soft and strong. You were never meant to be less, you were meant to be whole. So as you step back into your day, hold this truth close. The vow of silence no longer owns you. The world does not need a smaller version of you. It needs the fullness you once hid, and from this moment on, the choice is yours, to keep shrinking or to finally rise in the size of your soul. The door is open, the child within has been waiting, and now you are walking home.